Hoi, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 19 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Do you want to say hello?
Hello.
This is Yus. You might know him from our special Liberation episodes. We're welcoming him back. And we're also here with Lucy, as always. How are you, Lucy?
Fine. Just dreading the temperatures going up again. But
and does one of you want to introduce our topic for today?
Well, I've been asking around with the locals about what they would want the expats to learn about Maastricht. And it turned out that everybody wanted them to learn about the Maastricht dialect. And I was wondering, as an expat, when do you first realize there is a dialect? And what's the first moment for you?
I don't know. I think it comes up in a lot of conversations about learning Dutch, especially in Maastricht, because there's this feeling that, yes, I can learn Dutch, but how useful will it be with the local people? And how much, I imagine in some places it will really help integrate you into the community and help with that process. But in Maastricht, it feels like just another layer of a barrier between the local community and an expat, just because even if you do learn Dutch as the official language, it's still not enough. There's a dialect. And so I'm not sure exactly when I realised that there was a dialect. I guess you notice when you look up things about Maastricht as well that the language is an important aspect. I don't know in your lives, is dialect something that's had, I guess, an significance, or is?
Yes, of course, it has a significance. I only learned to speak Dutch when I was 4 or 5, so when I went to school.
Yeah.
So up until that moment, your life is just in dialect. So for me, whenever somebody speaks dialect, for instance Lucy, I find it very hard to speak English with her, but I also find it very hard to speak Dutch with her. And if we're like 3 or 4 people and one of them does not speak the dialect, we automatically go into the dialect, because it's our mother tongue, and so it certainly is a language of significance, and it's something you learn very early on as a Maastricht boy, in my case, that there are people who do not speak the dialect, and we should not think less of them, but we do. No, but it's this otherness that's created by the dialect.
it is also connected to a sense of place. It is an aspect of the authenticity that many people who are born and raised here will strive for, and more or less in a sentimental fashion. But when I'm speaking for myself, but I doubt this wouldn't apply to you as well. This is also a sense of history and what this culture is made of, and where we come from. Yeah. But my story is the opposite. Both my parents were teachers. And at the time, it was considered more opportune to raise the children in speaking the national language. They were very aware of the dialect being there. They were also very aware that because of the fact that my mother came from Biesland, which is now a neighborhood, but was then, a couple of farms, and definitely outside the walls of Maastricht, so she wasn't supposed to speak the real dialect. You can go into the grades in this in a minute, because it gets worse. And my father spent part of his childhood in Roermond, where they have a very different dialect, and he was sort of mocked for that his entire life. So he understood the Maastricht dialect perfectly, but didn't speak it because of all the mockery going on. People will do that. All of those reasons together was, we will teach the children Dutch, they will learn dialect. And they do, because small kids will just sort of absorb that. Yeah. So when I was in kindergarten, I was translating for the teacher we had who came from the east of the country and didn't understand what the children were saying. Juf, mijn rijstartel is los. Rijstartel is a very, very local word for what they call in Dutch a veter, a shoestring.
Yeah.
So, it's not as if you would as if you would manage to accommodate your ears to those differences very quickly.
Yeah. Well, we had a really interesting me and my partner experience when we went out for a socially distanced dinner with some of his work friends, and one of them was born and raised in Maastricht. And so we asked him if he knew what Haw Pin means. I don't think I'm pronouncing it right, but
Haw Pin.
Haw Pin, that's popped up a lot during COVID, and he didn't know. I don't think he'd seen it around because it's everywhere, and it's something we noticed, and then we noticed that underneath it had a translation to Dutch. So we're like, what language is it in? But it's obviously a dialect, but he had never heard of it. And he also said when we were talking to him that it does, the written way and the way it's spelt and stuff tends to vary a bit. Is that true? Written down as dialect?
As every language does, yes.
Yeah. Is it, so has it been a written language for a long time, or was it mostly just a spoken language?
Can I answer this one?
Yes.
It was of course mostly a spoken language. So the first traces of the dialect we now know as Maastricht is a version of Western Limburgish, which is a version of the Nether Frankish language, and it can be traced back to about the year 1200. But that's not Maastricht. That's not the language we speak today. So up until the 60s of the 20th century, people thought that languages changed, but dialects did not. And this is of course not true, because dialects change all the time. The first texts that we can describe as directly, what do you call it, gevolg.
Ik snap niet wat ze proberen te zeggen.
Maakt niks uit. Duur ze dit ook, dus het is ook leuk.
Nee, dat veel. Nee, dat is zeker. De mot gaat
Mot gaat Mestreechs in. So, but the first texts, you could say these are Maastrichtian texts, are from around 1770.
Okay.
So that's when people have this know-how of, hey, that it's another language, it's another dialect, so we can write things down in this dialect. But then, of course, in the ages before that, people just wrote down in Dutch, but there was no Dutch language. People just if you write a book in your dialect, not a lot of people are going to read it. And you want people to read it because you want to make money out of that book, of course. So you're going to write it in a language that somehow everybody in the Dutch country could understand. And then you write this kind of ABN, Algemeen Beschaafd Nederlands. So standard Dutch. But then still there are always local differences, as they are still now. So for instance, someone from Holland would use words in Dutch that we recognize, but would not use.
Right. Yeah.
Just like you use words in English that I recognize, but I cannot use because it's not my way of speaking.
I would say that that's applicable no matter where you're from. My partner he grew up in England until he was 10, and then they moved to New Zealand. And I have said words that he has no idea what they mean. As someone who grew up in the same place in Australia, and we're the same age, we speak the same language, but there are sometimes I'll just come out with something, or he'll come out with something, and we'll be like, I have no idea what that means. And so I imagine with the difference in language, that's even exacerbated.
Yeah, but so language is just a way to communicate with each other. So it doesn't really matter whatever you say. No. So I make lots of mistakes in English, and I don't care. I hope the listeners don't care, because it's just a way of getting information from my head into the heads of other people, and you shouldn't think of language as any more than that, actually.
Yeah.
So if you can describe the word you've used to your boyfriend.
Yeah.
Or you can use another word.
Sometimes, but sometimes it's very difficult because I think there's a reason words exist. It's like there are specific words that, and I know when you're learning a new language, and I'm sure you find this, both of you, that there'll be a word and they'll be like, oh, it's sort of like this, but it's sort of like that. It's not, there's a reason this word exists. It means this specific thing. The example that I used was the word daggy. I don't know. Do either of you know what that is? It's sort of lame, old-fashioned. If someone's wearing really dad shorts, and I would say they're daggy. It's that kind of. It's hard to. It's a hard thing to explain with extra words. So I understand language has layers.
Yeah. So if you speak with a lot of people that come from lots of places, you tend to make this lingua franca. Yeah. So this common language that everybody understands, and you'll see when people are going to another country and speak a language they really don't understand a word of, that they use hands, and they nod. Yeah. And then they are in India and it doesn't mean anything. And
you have to nod the other way.
Yeah, I think coming to a country where I don't speak the main languages, I've grown a very deep appreciation for non-verbal communication, for sure.
It definitely helps.
And, just the way that you can understand things without words. So yeah.
Can I just interject for a moment? We started this particular subject with you wondering what Haw Pin means. Are we going to explain that to her?
Oh, we can explain that because I've done some bit of research on Haw Pin.
I'm finally going to learn what.
I'm not going to agree. So yeah.
So I think this is very very particular for the Maastricht people. Haw Pin means, well, just keep on going on.
Stay strong.
Stay strong.
Carry on.
Like that. Carry on.
Yeah.
And in Maastricht there is this myth that this comes from the garrison. Mm-hmm. All right. That when a siege was going on, that they should use the cannons, and then they should load the cannons for the last time, and then they should have the pin, which is literally a stoke, and they should keep the stoke, Haw Pin, so that the cannon should keep on blasting. But there were not so many sieges of Maastricht that this could have go on to the normal people of Maastricht. So I read this and I found this very strange, and I was like, there are no sources, so where does this come from? And lots of times people just always assume, the Maastricht people assume it has something to do with the garrison, and most of the time it hasn't. So then I was looking around in the vicinity of Maastricht, where does this phrase derive from? So then of course I did not only look for Haw Pin, I translated it into Dutch. Haw Pin. Yeah. And the pin is the name we give in the Brabant language. So that's modern day Northern Brabant in the Netherlands, and then the province of Antwerp in Belgium, the province of Belgian Limburg, and the province of Flemish Brabant. And there they say pin to the stoke you keep in between two horses. And when these horses go, how do you say it, op hol slaan?
Bolt.
Okay, Lucy, you have to keep the stoke. You have to hold them down. So this is a phrase that has been around in all of Brabant for the 18th, 19th century. It still is being said in Tilburg, in which the phrase is zet de kan neer en pak de pin vast. Houd de pin vast. Zet de kan neer en houd de pin vast. So that means put down the pitcher and take the stoke. So the horses are just running away from you, and you have to keep them down.
Okay.
So you have to stay strong.
Right.
So I think that's where it derives from, mostly because there's lots of parallels in other Brabantian towns.
Yeah, that would support a thesis, of course. Yes, I have read an explanation that was connected to the canon as well, and that had to do with not using them until the very last moment, but disabling them at the very last moment. Right. So, and that would take extraordinary courage, of course, to stay under fire until the very last moment when the order to withdraw would come. but I can't point to sources like this.
But there's something else that's strange here, because Haw in Maastricht has two meanings. It's either to hit someone, hou mich niet, don't hit me, or it means keep it. And I believe in Haw Pin, it's hold it. But then there's another phrase in Maastricht, and that is ik hou de pin erin, which means I will knock the stoke in.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the hitting.
Yeah.
But that's again from something else. That's because of the turf. Oh.
It is pretty recently decayed plant material, and you can dig it up and burn it.
Yeah, I know what you mean, like peat.
Yes, right. That's the word.
Digging into my English brain to find the word peat.
How do you say it? People who work there, are they pitch workers?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, well, peat workers. They had to know where they were working, so they had these stokes and they knocked them in, and then on Saturday or whenever they went home, they had the last stoke. So they knocked the stoke in, and then this means ik hou de pin erin in Maastricht means I'm finished.
Okay.
I'm going to stop working.
Yeah. And is that something that would be used today? Like
Yeah, all the time. When my mother calls me and says, "Are you still working?" Then I would say, "Ja, ik hou zo de pin erin." So I'm going to stop in a bit.
Okay.
But both of these do not come from Maastricht.
Yeah.
Both of these, so that's really, you should not see the Maastricht dialect as something that's on its own. It's always very, very, very contextual.
Yeah. I know that one of Matthew, my boyfriend, his favourite things is asking people what, like sayings, like you're saying, and strange wordplay, like cat's got your tongue, or that kind of, like sayings. Well, that's one example in Maastricht. Are there other ones?
Oh, loads. Of
Yeah.
Loads.
Yeah, you could fill it.
Goed die graag oploeren, herkomst van Sint-Jaan.
Do you have any favourites or weird ones that don't sort of translate right?
Well, that's very typical. A normal one, and Lucy can think of another one. We say in every city in the Netherlands, there is a saying there has to go a lot of water through the river.
Okay, yeah.
Before we, and in Maastricht, we always say there has to go a lot of water through the Meuse. So that's a Maastricht saying that you can translate into English.
Yeah, no, that's an easy one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I haven't thought of anything.
One of my favorites is herkomst van Sint-Jaan. So he comes from St. John's, which means he pretends he doesn't know what's going on.
Okay.
And I have no idea why. Maybe Lucy does.
I was having an association right away with St. John's having been, how would you say that, annexed by the Protestants when they took the city in the 17th century. But that there's no connection with that meaning at all. So
someone from St. John's just gave them a real bad reputation.
I think it has to do with St. John's night. You know, the night of the devils and everything,
yes.
And then
that might be more.
I think that's where it comes from originally.
Well, of course, we could plan a podcast sometime just on sayings, and then we'll gather them and tell the stories.
Because I know there are some great ones just from all around the world that translate terribly, and it's amazing to hear the worst ones.
I think it's something that both Lisa and I would really like to talk about now, and that's the literature in the Maastricht dialect, because every city in Europe has a dialect, but not every city has a dialect that is as strong as the Maastricht dialect, and certainly not many cities of the very petite size of Maastricht.
Well, I know like the street signs, I think it's almost like if you go to dual language places, like New Zealand, they'll have Maori and English, or Wales, they'll have Welsh and English. A lot of the signs here are in both, I guess, Dutch and dialect. Yeah. So it is very visible if you know what you're looking at, which a lot of people I'm sure do not. I didn't when I first moved here. But yeah, so is there a lot of literature in dialect? Literature? Loads,
which is very, very strange and amazing. And the roots of this literature are with the Belgian Revolution.
Oh.
Which makes it very interesting, which is also why I wanted to talk about this. When Napoleon conquered all of Europe, can we say all of Europe?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much all of Europe.
Up to Moscow.
Yeah, so Napoleon, great guy, not. But when he went away, then there's this once in a lifetime chance to reorganize all countries, and they made nations out of most of these countries, and we still live in nations right now. One of these nations was the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, which consists of more or less modern day Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And in this new country, new nation, both the northern Netherlands, which is basically all of the current day Netherlands except for Limburg, and then the southern Netherlands, which is Belgium and Luxembourg. And in the southern Netherlands there is this other political world in which French is way more important, because everybody spoke French from the 18th century. And Maastricht, as you know, is very close to the big city of Liège, where they speak French. So French was the most important language in Maastricht from 1600 on.
Just about, yeah.
So up until the 20th century, there were lots of people in Maastricht who learned Maastricht and French, who did not care about Dutch. There were lots of people who did not speak Dutch in Maastricht because they knew the dialect. And if someone from Holland came over, then they could tweak the dialect a little, just pronounce some words a little different, and then they spoke the language.
Of course, it also helped that in those years, pretty much until after the Second World War, French was the language of international diplomacy anyway. So it also functioned as a kind of lingua franca, the language that everybody can use to a certain extent, the way English does now. So that helped, because to us now French is very far away. It's very alien. But 100 years ago, that was not the case.
No, there are lots of... this was among the elites in Maastricht. It was normal to speak French.
Yeah.
And if you consider that Maastricht and Liège were twin cities, still are in my viewpoint. But
yeah, of course. Except Liège is the big sister, and we are the little one.
Right. So the Maastricht elite was the same as the Liègian elite. Okay. So if sons of the Maastricht bankers became banker in Liège, and vice versa. So this was just the same elites. And then, of course, you speak French. And this changed the moment of the Belgian Revolution, because the Belgian Revolution made that all of the Netherlands, Dutch Limburg, became Belgian. Except for Maastricht, because Maastricht was the Boulevard des Pays-Bas, so the most important fortification of the Netherlands, and you could not give it to the Belgians, and so on and so on. And then in 1839 they signed a peace in London. They decided that Maastricht remained Dutch, and Antwerp could become Belgian. And then the rest of the province of Limburg is just a corridor to Maastricht. But of course Maastricht is above the language border. So there was no more French as an official language in the Netherlands, in this new 1839 country. And this was a problem for the Maastricht, because they always had this feeling of, we are not Northern Netherlandish, we are Southern Netherlandish, because we speak French. We have this same common background as the rest of Belgium, we would say now.
And in many different ways as well.
Yeah.
Being primarily Catholic and being primarily used to other kinds of power structures than something like the United Provinces in the Low Countries.
So they really wanted to remain different. And you can still sense this in modern day Maastricht, modern day Limburg. We like to say, we are different from you. And this worked very well, because in the rest of the Netherlands, they always say, you are different from us. And the dialect is one of many, many ways to underline this otherness. And it's not surprising, where does this focus for the dialect come from? From Liège, of course. So because the Liègian elites were having an interest in Walloon literature, and so Walloon is a dialect, you could say, of French, with lots of old Celtic influences in it. And of course the Walloon has also had its influences on the Maastricht. We have one very much used, many often used Celtic word, it's by, which means horse.
I didn't know that.
Ah.
That's where that comes from. Okay.
So it's the same as cheval,
Yeah.
but then it's cheval, by, which comes from, not from the Roman, but from the Celtic.
I know my dad is Scottish and he doesn't speak Scottish Gaelic or anything, but he noticed that Kirk, is that closer than Kirk? But Kirk is what he would call a church in Scotland, and Kirk is church here. So he said, I know what that means when he visited. So I don't know if that's related or if it's a coincidence, but I don't...
I think that's a coincidence. I think church is Germanic, and then there's this other
And
thing going on.
Gaelic precedes that.
Yeah. But Walloon is the same as Wales.
Okay.
And it just means Celtic.
Yeah.
So there was this, and this the furthest back I'll go. The Walloon movement was inspired by the Flemish movement, because the French was the main language of Belgium, but of course lots of people spoke Dutch, and they wanted to emancipate themselves, and they began to say, well, we are all Flemish. Okay. Even though if you ask somebody 200 years ago in Brussels,
Let's not get into this, please.
are you Flemish? You would say no. But so all of a sudden,
This gets really complicated.
it's really complicated. It's really whenever the southern Netherlands are involved, it's really complicated. So there's this Dutch part of the country all of a sudden. So what you have against this Dutch part? Well, it's the Walloon part. It's all new. It's the Walloon part, and. The Maastricht elite looked at these people in Liège who began to write operas in Walloon, who began to write books in Walloon, who began to record local sayings, and they wanted to do the same. And why? Because they saw that the Maastricht dialect could be used against the Dutch oppressors, and it's still used in that sense.
Yeah.
So what you felt like there's this second barrier I have to cross. It is there because the Maastricht people are still
it's
very
on purpose.
much Well, we don't think about it.
No, yeah.
It's not like I'm going to speak dialect just to exclude somebody, but
No, and generally speaking, the dialect speakers will shift to Dutch as soon as there's someone in the group who doesn't speak the dialect. I mean, we're not being rude about it, but it definitely has this element of wanting to express your identity, and also your identity as being different of the dominant culture, so to speak. Because this part of the country does have lots of reasons to, at any rate in the past, have felt oppressed by Holland, the main power in the Republic. And I don't think that's conscious with many people now. I mean, they don't really know that that's where it comes from. But there is this funny mixture of both feeling intimidated and resisting the Dutch. And it gets really entertaining when, as a Southerner, you go to Holland and you get the comments from the Hollanders as they are now. Because the only thing I heard from the Hollanders was, why the hell did you leave that gorgeous Maastricht? So, yeah, okay.
I get that a lot coming from Australia. They're like, why? Well, there's reasons. And that's something that I think, and as someone who is Australian and went through Australian schooling and learned about, obviously, the terrible things that happened to our Indigenous people, language played a huge part in that. And when you said that you weren't allowed to, I know you said before you weren't allowed to speak the dialect in school. Yeah, it sort of clicked in my mind that obviously extremely drastic and violent version of that was taking children and not letting them do anything. In Australia, the Indigenous children and the stolen generation, not letting them do anything related to their culture. So I think there is a strong imprint of that in people, even if you don't immediately think about it. There's sort of this, No,
but of course this same colonial project was executed here as well, and not with the horrendous violence that the Aboriginals have had to endure, but that of course that is also because the cultures were closer together. Yeah. You know, when a Stone Age culture meets 18th century Great Britain, you know that's not gonna work. You know that, but yeah, it's the mechanisms are comparable. Yeah.
I think the Maastricht people, even when Lucy was a child, it's a joke, Lucy.
That's probably a statement of fact. So, you know, I'm just keeping my neutral face here. Yeah.
There's always been this, from 1770 onward, there's always been this awareness.
I wasn't a child then.
No, I know. People should know that Lucy was not a child in the 1770s. She was way older in the 1770s. But there's always been this awareness of the dialect. But if you see on the other side of the border, in Belgium, most of the dialects have disappeared. Because there really was this strong, they call it the taalstrijd, so it's the language battle. Which was also, I don't know if you know Voeren, that's a small country. Part of Belgian Limburg, which used to be part of the Liège province.
I'm giggling now because this is some tangent. I'm gonna put
some tangents. Yes, people were shot during the 90s. I think it was
the 1990s.
Yes. The 1990s. Yeah. So it was in Belgium. It still is really a battle, and there had to be a strong Dutch movement that was 100% Dutch. Like the language Dutch, Flemish. Yeah. So that pushed away all the dialects. And in the Netherlands, well here in Dutch Limburg, I always want to say Netherlandish Limburg. But you could say that. Yeah. But in Dutch Limburg there is, the dialect is normal, people use it. Yeah. People are not ashamed of it.
No. Yeah, not anymore.
Not anymore, but in Belgium they are still. So you should not speak your dialect. And when I was with somebody from West Flanders, they all were very, very amazed of the dialect in Maastricht. And they said, "But that's rude to speak dialect." Wow. And I called my mother in dialect when I was in the home and just discussing everything. And it was rude because they couldn't hear what I was talking about. So that's really strange. So I think that's the way it was here like 50 years ago, or 20 years ago. And I have to make up.
No, I'll get you some other time.
But that's the way the dialect is viewed in Belgium, and it was viewed here until recently.
Yeah, is that a class issue as well? Like, because I know a lot of language stuff is obviously integrated in race and class and culture.
Yeah, but I mean, I was giggling about it because Belgium is singularly complicated. Yeah. This has deep historical roots, and all aspects of power struggle, the economic force waxing and waning, and states being dynastic policies, and if you want to tell the story of the past 200 years of Belgium, we'll be here until sundown easily. It's very complicated. Yeah. But yes, this difference is very interesting. Yes. This disdain for the local language, which of course must have helped fuel support for the state language. So, and in this case, Flemish, Dutch. Yeah.
But it's because in Maastricht the elites who, before they used Maastricht, they used French to be other from the other Dutch. And as soon as they couldn't use this French anymore, they had to find another way to express their otherness. And they found this in the dialect.
Okay.
So that's also why you can find a lot of 19th century poetry in dialect.
Well, lovely listeners, you might have been able to guess with Lucy, me and Yus on the podcast that this would turn into a two-parter. So this episode will be part 1 of our series on Maastricht Dialect. Keep an eye out for part 2 next week. In the meantime, before we head off, I'm going to include a couple of clips of some songs in Maastricht dialect, so please enjoy them, and we hope you tune in next time.
Ja, diep is het van hart gelegen, Mestreechs door alle eeuwen heen. Verbleven dich altijd gelegen, en derde dreugheid en plezier. Verhuurde na die oude histories, terugkeert op kampioenen schoen. We zouden blonken bij die glories, of pleegelde bij die genoeg. Wie des was dus niet prijs gegeven, maar heeft in toen toch opgeleefd. En ongeknapt is er gebleven, door onze band van trouw en lief. Daarom de handen stoken gestoken, het hoofd gericht op stalen leeg. En wordt daarop dan in ons gewoken, dan blijkt gerust het uitgestreekt.
Het meuleke van Engelen, dat draait maar van alleen. De veertjes hebben de mazelen en de leeuwkes hebben geen been.
De oude Engelen heeft het gewonnen, hiep hoera, hiep hoera. De oude Engelen heeft het gewonnen, hiep hoera, hiep hoera.
Het meuleke van Engelen, dat is zo rot bistrond. De veertjes hebben de mazelen en de leeuwkes de rode grond.
De oude Engelen heeft het gewonnen, hiep hoera, hiep hoera. De oude Engelen heeft het gewonnen.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook by searching Meet Maastricht and on Instagram at @meet_Maastricht. If you would like to learn more about us, you can also visit our website at meetmaastricht.eu, where you can buy tickets and subscribe to our monthly newsletter so you're always up to date. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.